Hello dear chess lovers, today we are talking about attacking the opponent's king, specifically how to target the weakest point around the opponent's king. It's black to play in this position. Please find the winning continuation for black. Folks, so far we discussed pawn storms in generating an attack against the king. Then we looked at those distracted piece sacrifices to make the king naked. Now I'm showing you another tool in your disposal when you're attacking the opponent's king. Always ask yourself, what could be the weakest point around the king? Why? Because usually mates happen on that very square, and your piece coordination will revolve around that weakest point around the opponent's king. Weaknesses in chess is very important because that gives us plans in the middle game when it comes to positional chess. Same applies when it comes to attacking the opponent's king. In this case, let's discuss this position, folks. It's black to play, and despite being a piece down, you see the opponent's king being so unsafe on f1. The g file has been opened up. There's a fishbone pawn on f3. There is a choking effect on the white king, correct? Our queen is beautifully posted, but we need to activate those rooks. If I, for example, ask you, what could be the weakest point around the opponent's king, I'm 100% sure you will tell me the answer is g1. Because if you look a little bit closely in this position, this g1 square can be guarded only by the white king. It's very difficult for white to bring reinforcements of that square. This rook is guarding the square g2. g2 also looks very weak right now, but we cannot mate the opponent's king on g2 because this rook covers that square. But this also means the rook is tied down in protecting g2, which means if we press the g1 square even more, this rook has no defensive function. It can no longer go back to h1, for example, right? So, given the orientation phase, please tell me the move, folks. You're a great player if you found the move rook g8. Is this a blunder? Are we blundering our rook? Well, we can take our rook, but we can replace it with the other rook. And now we are down one full rook. And despite that, we are hitting the g1 square with our pieces. You see the coordination in black's army. And once you look closer, white has zero defense left against a single idea. If they move the rook, let's say somewhere here, then queen g1 is mate. If they go back with rook to guard the g1 square like this, well, the first problem applies, and we still mate the opponent's king, correct? So from this position, one thing is absolutely clear. When we are searching for a plan to intensify our attack, it's always a great question to identify our main targets. And targets you identify by asking yourself, what could be that square that is only guarded by the opponent's king? This will give you ideas. And I will show you so many interesting positions that highlights this point. That's a famous game, beautiful game of Garry Kasparov. White to play, folks. Please look at the king's position on f8 and tell me a good-looking idea for white. There are two very good ideas for white in this position, and I want you to, identify the main idea by focusing on the weakest point around the opponent's king. Congratulations, folks. If you come up with the move bishop h7, that's a beautiful move that basically targets the g8 square, because g8, you see, is only guarded by the king. It's already attacked once, so we can intensify our attack on that specific square. Well, there are two different ways to do it. Rook g3 also is a good move. Let's compare and contrast rook g3 and bishop h7. Bishop h7 was chosen by great Garry Kasparov in the actual game. And again, you see the function of the fishbone pawn on f6, correct? There is no king e7, for example. And if king e8, let's continue in this line, folks. That's a beautiful line. Rook g8 check, bishop f8. Is our attack losing its steam? Or can you look two plies deeper? White to play, folks. Please stop the video and find that finishing blow for white. That's great. Three-ply calculation puzzle, folks. You're a great player if you saw the entire sequence. Take on f8, followed by, you tell me, the weakest point around the opponent's king. Yes, rook g3 and rook g8 is a devastating threat because that square cannot be guarded by any other black piece, but only the black king, correct? And now you see those three pieces just giving a mating blow against the black king. Has no escape squares. If it repeats, then there's no more bishop cover on f8 and the game is over, right? You see, this pawn is also limiting that king and the game is over. So in this initial position, bishop h7 was directly winning. In fact, that was the game continuation. He tried bishop f2 check. The idea was that if the rook captures the bishop, then this rook is sort of, not eyeing g8 anymore. But Gary saw further. He played king h5. One more check is allowed, but he sees king h6, and this king cannot be hit anymore, and no one can stop the move rook g8, and black actually resigned in this position because there is not even bishop f8 cover after king e8, correct? So devastation happens because of this specific square on g8 that is lacking defenders. Well, if you go back to initial position, folks, instead of bishop h7, rook g3 was also a good move with the same idea, correct? You want to mate on g8. But here, you're allowing bishop f2, and now you must take the bishop because the rook, otherwise this rook gets pinned. And for the moment, our mating attack is not there, and this gives black one full tempo to play d5, and luckily for white, e takes d6 is a great move because this creates these ideas if king e8, otherwise d7 is also becoming a devastating idea for white, just stopping king e8. For example, bishop d5, we can take, if they take back, comes d7, and you see, the king has no escaping square anymore. Those pawns are choking the black king, and now this is coming. No one can stop that. You also can stop king h5 to prevent all these checks. And finally, rook g2, and the game is over. But Gary did not go for that because that's a longer line. You see, he doesn't even go rook g3 here because that's longer, much deeper to calculate. He finds the move bishop h7. That's a nice comparison, but our main idea is the same. We want to attack the specific square on g8. Another beautiful position here, folks. It's white to play. Please stop the video. How would you continue your attack against the enemy king? Let's do it, folks. So first things first, those dark squares are lacking defenders. Our pieces are eyeing the king side and we have attacking chances. And the first move is very, very logical. You go f6 and you signify queen h6 followed by queen g7 mating idea. Now g7 square seems to be the weakest point around the opponent's king. But of course, black will find a way to stop that. Black will find a way to cover g7 like that. And now comes the interesting part. The attack continues to evolve in this position. It's white to play. Please reevaluate the position. Ask yourself those questions. What is the weakest point around the opponent's king right now? Because things might be different right now. And what is that move that signifies, that intensifies your attack on that weakest point? Let's do it together, folks. To me, the weakest point now is h7, because once you look deeper, this rook cannot defend h7 anymore. It's already hit once and guarded only by the black king. This makes it the weakest square around the black king, correct? h7 now becomes our main target of attack. So what is needed for that? How do we put more pressure on h7 in this position? Well, the rooks must somehow join the attack on the h file, correct? It seems like we cannot do it directly because if you start with this move, the bishop can capture that, right? Right? Are you sure? Well, you're a great player if you play the move rook f3 anyways, because after takes, your rook on a2 is now ready for h2. Isn't it beautiful? That's like Sam Shankland rule, right? I want to play this move, and if you want to take me, it doesn't change anything. I want to play that move anyways because I can calculate 2 plies deeper. My calculation ability improves, and I can see my rook is joining an attack on the h2 square. Why? Because we want to attack and mate the opponent's king on the weakest point, namely the h7 square. And here black has to try d5 to be able to sacrifice their queen after rook h2. Should we play rook h2, or can you see even stronger idea for white in this position? How can we prevent the queen sacrifice on h2? You're a great player if you found a very simple move f4, and now the queen cannot eye the h2 point and no one can stop us from playing rook h2. So let's continue and finish this attack. D takes c4. What should white play here, folks? You tell me. You tell me. Always give yourself choices. If a good-looking move appears in your radar, give yourselves more choices. Maybe you are missing even a stronger continuation. I'm talking about checkmate patterns, folks. I'm sure many of you have seen this mating motif, and you're a great player if you found the most forcing sequence: queen takes h7, king takes h7, and rook h2. Isn't it like a beautiful, lovely mate? You only need a pawn and a rook to deliver this mate, and of course, this g8 rook is cutting off the king's escape as well. That's a beautiful mating motif, and white wins. You see, after f4 dc, this mating motif suddenly became an option for white because of our good pieces eyeing the king side, correct? So again, you see the effect of the fishbone pawn on f6, limiting and choking the black king, which forces rook g8, but that's also bad for their king's safety. That allows us to mate the opponent king with this beautiful, lovely mate, okay? So what do we see from this position? You see, first, it looks like the weakest point was g7, and you see how it evolves from g7 to h7 gradually. Sometimes, as this example shows us, there could be multiple squares that are potentially our target, but once we put pressure on that first target, then the enemy must give us the second target, right? Namely, the h7 point is now becoming the weakest point around the black king because they can guard g7 but not h7, right? Imagine a knight appearing magically on f8. Then they could guard h7 that way. But you see, black is lacking any knights in this position. No piece can defend h7 in the long run. And here, as you see, once we know the target, those moves come to our mind naturally. Dream states and reverse engineering, right? We are reverse engineering our way to find a way for our pieces to reach and attack h7 twice in this position. That's as simple as that. That's a function of identifying the weakest squares around the enemy king when you're evolving your attacks, when you're building up your attacks, just like that. And then you can be rewarded by engaging in such beautiful mates. One more example, folks. Chigorin Steinitz. Beautiful, beautiful Chigorin. And his attacking vision was something else. Even at that time, it's white to play, folks. How do you build up your attack in this position? You have three pieces eyeing the king side. Black's pieces are sleeping on the queen side. And yes, we sacrificed, well, one pawn to come here as white, right? We sacrificed one pawn to come here. That comes from Evans' gambit, by the way. Maybe some of you recognize that. But we are searching for a good way to build our attack against the black king. There's also some, let's say, some threats you are facing on the pawn. What should white play, folks? You're a great player if you found the move bishop f6. That's a stock standard, let's say, piece sacrifice around the opponent's king. What's the biggest point of this move? If you take my bishop, let's look at this line, folks. If you take my bishop, you tell me now. Please stop the video. Ask yourself this very simple question. What is the weakest point around the opponent's king right now? And can I exploit that? Can I bring more pieces? Can I coordinate my pieces on that weakness? And yes, folks, the answer is the square h7. In this new pawn formation, this h7 square is very relevant. And how do you put more pressure? Yes, bishop e4, and suddenly the queen and the bishop is eyeing that weakest point. No black pawn or piece can reinforce h7. If they push h6, well, very simple move, queen f5, and you intensify your attack on h7 directly by forming queen and bishop battery, and black is totally helpless against the mate on the next turn. Isn't it beautiful? So this means after bishop f6, gf is not possible, but the game doesn't end here, right? Let's continue. Let's continue, folks. By the way, if you start with bishop f4 directly, thinking that this is the most relevant weakness, black has a defense. Black can defend with g6, h6, but even f5, right? And they're offering a queen trade. You don't want to trade queens in this position. If you take en passant, you're losing your queen on h5. You don't want that, right? You see, just because a weakness appears to be relevant doesn't mean that you should play it directly. That should be in your radar, but try to find a better way to execute your ideas. f5, bishop d5, checking h8, and there is no mate to follow. We don't want to trade queens, which means our pieces has to retreat, and we're losing momentum as white in this position. So that's why great Chigorin played the move bishop f6. And, well, gf6 doesn't work. And the best move in this position was knight e7. And now we are talking about another beautiful pattern here, folks. I will tell you one more good move for white in this position. Let's say we go knight d2 in this position. Please stop the video and tell me whether this bishop can be captured on d5. Can black capture that bishop, and what happens if they do so? You're a great player if you understood that this cannot be played by black. And why? Let's look at this, folks. Knight takes d5 will be a big blunder, because now it's your turn to find a mating attack, mating blow for white. Folks, g7 is now becoming the weakest point around the opponent's king. And how do you put more pressure? Yes, queen g5 creates a mate in one threat. Gf is not possible because that pawn is pinned, which leaves black with only a single move, knight takes f6. But after e takes f6, g7 remains to be the weakest point around the opponent's king. And after g6, you tell me the next move. Of course, queen h6, and no one can stop the mate on g7. You see, black has no pieces that can reinforce this g7 point, and the game is over directly. So knight e7 is a good move, but black has to be so careful to survive. The only move is d6, but I can play knight e4 anyways. I am bringing more pieces to the attack. Rook d1 will follow, something like this, right? And look at this. White has great initiative, momentum on the king side, but yes, black is not getting mated directly in this position, but it's also very difficult to play those positions. That's why Chigorin loved initiative, sacrificing a pawn to play those middle games, and Steinitz was a very stubborn defender. He liked to take those positions with an extra pawn and defend very stubbornly. I've shown you this chess classic before. That's a famous game between Fischer and Benko. Let's do some space repetition, folks. It's white to play. Please stop the video and tell me the best move for white in this position. How does white intensify the attack on the black king? What are you seeing? What could be the weakest point around the black king? Ask yourself this question, and then we are talking. Then there must be some nice candidate moves that appear to your mind. Folks, I think it's very clear. The weakest point around the opponent's king is h7, right? Our queen is hitting it once. It's only being guarded by the black king, and our bishop is also ideally placed. Something will happen on that diagonal. We'll hit that square with multiple pieces. So that has to be seen from this position. h7 is our main target of attack. But if you push e5 directly, which looks like the most logical move, you tell me what black will do to you. You're a great player if you found a beautiful defensive resource f5, blunting the bishop, also offering a queen trade, right? The black queen is now eyeing the white queen, and if you capture the queen, the knight will return back, and we lost all momentum. Our knight is also hanging, we have to retreat, and the black king is safe. You see, e5 looks like a beautiful move, but you have to see f5. That's why chess is a difficult game, because you need to be looking at the best option for the opponent at all times, correct? So f5 refutes e5, but it doesn't mean that we should give up on our idea. Is there a way for us to stop f5? That's the question, right? So you're about to play e5, and you don't want to see e5 for black on the next turn. Now we are talking about progressive deepening. Now we are talking about those derived moves. You can change the very first move to make your idea work in a better context. And you're a great player if you found Fischer's move, the blocking sacrifice, rook f6, double exclam. What a beautiful move this is. This one was totally designed to stop f5 resource from black, and the next move is e5, and white is intensifying the attack on the weakest point around the opponent's king. If you take my rook, then comes e5, and no one can stop queen h7 anymore, right? Because there is no f5 block in this position. Isn't it beautiful? A lovely little position, folks, don't you think? So after rook f6, well, black had nothing to play for in this position. Well, if you play h6 in this position, then I will play e5 anyways, right? e5 anyways, and now you're facing such threats of rook h6 takes and the mate on the next turn, right? And e5 activates my bishop. There is nothing left for black to do. I can even take your knight on the next turn, followed by queen f5, again intensifying my attack on h7. So after rook f6, Benko was completely lost in his position, and Fischer won the game very, very quickly from here. But you see, for the purpose of this episode, the most important thing is this. You should identify the weakest points, but calculation is very important. You have to also see the best moves for the opponents at all times. But just because one idea doesn't work, you should not give up that easily. You should try to find that move that messes up with the opponent's only defensive resource. And f5 was their only defensive resource in his position. And once Fischer sees that, he stops that, and the attack is growing to its decisive proportions. This will be your homework position, folks. It's white to play. It's a very rich attacking position. Obviously, white has several pieces looking at the king side, and black has several offside pieces on the queen side. But what is the right way to start an attack against the black king? That's my question. What are you seeing, and what should be done to coordinate a decisive attack against the black king? Okay, ask yourself those questions that I taught you in this episode, and please formulate a good plan, good attacking plan for white, and write to me on YouTube, and I will give you feedback. Each and every one of you, I'm responding to your comments, folks. I hope this was a good episode for you. We continue our series on attacking chess. What are those things that we should pay attention to, right? In first videos, we talked about pawn storms, and then those distractive piece sacrifices to gain access to the opponent's king, correct? We talked about piece sacrifices, pawn sacrifices to awaken our pieces. We talked about those basic attacking patterns like the Greek gift and so on. This video talked about specifically about identifying the weakest point around the opponent's king, and this way we are coordinating our pieces on that weakest point. Just like in strategy, weaknesses is important when it comes to attacking chess, and hopefully this video gave you some ideas, right? We saw, for example, how it starts from one weakness and gradually evolve into a different weakness, right? G7 square was weak, and then suddenly H7 became weak, right? How we can tie down the opponent's pieces to certain squares, and we can change directions, find new targets, and so on. So it's a fascinating thing, of course, right? To go through those puzzles by always asking ourselves those why questions. Why is this move the best move? What is the guideline for this? How can we reverse engineer our way to find those good moves? And this weakness awareness will give you that. That's a function of this training. By identifying those weaknesses, weakest points, we are having a direction in our thought process, rather than you should look at every single check, capture, threat. That's a very blind and trial and error process that makes sure that you will lose on time in your games. So that's a function of this training. It's much more goal directed. We learn to look at the right things that you can transfer to other positions, right? So please give me feedback, and I'm waiting for your responses. And if you like the video, folks, please give me a like and subscribe. That's very important for me to be able to produce similar content for you. Again, I'm doing these videos to help you improve your chess, and I will catch you on the very next episode. Bye-bye.